Should the US have higher import tariffs? Hi, my name is Knightsbridge. I'll be answering this question for you. Really depends, I guess, on who you're talking to. Question is referring to basically taxes on goods that are imported into the US from other countries. Now, there are rules. The US is part of an organization called the World Trade Organization that sets kind of the rules and regulations to trade, and that includes, of course, tariffs or levies or taxes, basically, on anything that's imported into the country. Now, a lot of countries sign free trade agreements where basically there are no tariffs or limited tariffs, so in set industries or perhaps altogether. Case in the EU, of course, big problem with the UK's departure, with Brexit departing the European Union, is that in the future, if a special agreement is not negotiated between the EU and Britain, the UK, then if you revert back to basically standard World Trade Organization rules, there will be tariffs. So big part of the problem for Theresa May, the Prime Minister of the UK, dealing with Brussels in terms of Brexit is what kind of access to the EU's marketplace the UK is going to have, because currently the European Union obviously operates like one state. As in, for example, the United States. So from one state to another, there are no levies, there's no tariffs or anything. So goods, money, and people, for the most part, move freely across borders. Now, this question is probably referring to Donald Trump's recent statements regarding, and I believe actually a day or two ago, he signed an order initiating tariffs on aluminum and steel. Aluminum at 10% and steel, I believe, at 25%. Now, in the run-up, and since then, he has mentioned that a few countries are going to be exempt. We still don't know exactly which ones, but it seems that Mexico and Canada are on the list. I guess because we have an agreement called the North America Free Trade Association, or NAFTA, it would be really hard to impose tariffs on goods coming from Canada and Mexico, because it's probably already on the books limits as to how, which countries, how they can raise tariffs, put any tariffs. But anyway, Mexico and Canada are huge exporters to the US when it comes to steel, particularly, as is the EU. And I believe currently the EU is trying to get basically something concrete, something solid from Washington as to whether they will be exempt or not, as are some other states. So in a word, basically, if today we're talking about trade being the answer to everyone's economic woes, which I don't believe is necessarily the only solution, or rather the best way for kind of fair trade, that we remove barriers, that we remove boundaries between countries, and basically everyone has to compete on the same level, which is very hard because a lot of countries obviously don't have the same living standards, purchasing power. People don't have to spend as much on food, clothing, water, what have you, housing in other countries. So it's very hard when you have average incomes in the West being far higher than in the East to kind of compete on an even playing field. So import tariffs to a degree are required, I would say. Otherwise, Western states, it makes it very hard for them to compete, obviously, with people in the East, because they can essentially, regulations are much less stringent, incomes, of course, pay for the workers is much lower, etc. So it would be very hard. I mean, the American steel industry has been decimated, and some people are talking about this being good for the American steel industry. However, it's kind of maybe a little bit too little too late, and it does obviously, as the EU has alluded to, as well as Mexico before we found out that North American countries were going to be exempt, The problem that arises is that there are retaliatory factors and risks. So the EU already had drawn up a list of goods, including American Levi jeans, kind of the iconic Americana, that they're going to target with tariffs. Also, if the US was going to impose tariffs on EU steel or EU aluminum and goods. So really not such a clear-cut answer to this. You do risk trade wars, but I think some tariffs are necessary, especially when you're trading with countries with a very vastly different quality and standard of living, rankings and index, as well as pay gaps and etc. So yeah, in short, they can be good, but they are also risky. Free trade, that's a whole other topic that requires a lot longer answer. But yeah, that's my answer. Thank you for listening, watching. If you have any questions, please post them below and I'll try and answer them spontaneously. Thank you.